Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. This is going to be my second forecast for the 2023 to 2024 winter season. I'm sorry I haven't been posting a lot lately. There's been less tropics, which is obviously what most of my videos are on. But y'all love this last winter forecast so much, and there's still a lot to explain and more stuff I'm going to tell y'all. So without further ado, let's get started. So the updated ENSO forecast. Now we do see here winter, that box, obviously December, January, and February. The El Nino probabilities have gotten higher for winter since the last forecast. Now, obviously, in the last forecast, we were still expecting a strong El Nino for the whole winter, and we are still expecting that. But now we are expecting it to go into the spring a little longer, maybe March, April, stuff like that. So obviously, nothing much has changed, but obviously for the entire winter, 85% or over percent chance probabilities for an El Nino and a strong El Nino, so above +1 probably for most to all of the winter, maybe even in spring. Now, we are not talking about spring, but I'm just saying that could last and bring a lot of these winter impacts into the early spring, March, maybe even into early April. Now, that is just preliminary, and I'll make another video on spring potentially later or tomorrow or something like that. But for now, we're just talking about winter, obviously. Now, obviously, the El Nino typical winter pattern, the subtropical jet is displaced a lot more south, bringing a lot of that cool and wet weather across the southwest, central south United States, and into the southeast, even up into a little bit of the east coast, while that cool and while that warm, dry air is up towards the mid-Atlantic and the northwest, due to that polar jet stream obviously staying north towards Canada, and low pressure systems will come in more south. Now, what we could be seeing from that more cold and wet winter is obviously snowstorms, more severe weather, stuff like that. That's the typical El Nino winter pattern. Now, there's a lot more that goes into that, and I'll show you that in a second, but this is just what we generally expect, which is what I showed you in the last video. Now, obviously, this is not exactly what I'm expecting, obviously, because not every El Nino is the same. Now, obviously, this is going to be the basic setup, but like I just said, we're going to get into the more specifics in a second, like right now. So, one of the things that goes into it is the Arctic oscillation phase. Now, we have a positive and a negative phase. Positive phases keep that cold air more north, storms more north. The southern United States, stuff like that, gets drier and less drier and hotter air. Sorry, I lost my words for a second. Now, that is not what we expect in El Nino. Now, but there is something to say that ENSO and Arctic oscillation, while they can work hand in hand, one does not determine the other. So if you had a positive Arctic oscillation phase and a El Nino, it could kind of hinder your wetter air and cooler air in the southern United States. Now, negative phases bring that cooler air more south, bring that wetter air more south. And what that's going to do is like kind of what an El Nino does. Now, what we are expecting is a negative phase. So the El Nino and the negative Arctic oscillation phase are going to work together to kind of bring a lot more wet air and a lot more cool air to the southern United States and dry and warm air to the Midwest and Northwest United States. Now, what that means is just El Nino effects are going to be enhanced. Now, if it was a positive phase, the El Nino effects would still take place. They just might be a little weakened. Now, a negative phase is going to cause those El Nino effects to be enhanced. Now, this is a very rare setup. Now, it's hard to predict if we're actually going to stay in a negative phase into the winter because Arctic oscillation is a very short-term thing. But it is expected, me and a lot of people are expecting this to stay in a negative phase, which is just going to enhance the El Nino's effects. And along with that, with the negative phase causing cooler air, wetter air to go more south, we're expecting a negative NAO phase, which is just doing the same thing as the Arctic oscillation and the negative Arctic oscillation phase, and the El Nino. It's going to bring cold and snowy air to the south, while that warm air is going to stay more north towards Canada, the Northwest, Midwest, and stuff like that. And positive phases, same thing as a positive Arctic oscillation or a La Nina. Warm air goes south, cool air goes west and north. Now, obviously, we're going to be in a negative phase, like I said, for the NAO2. So a negative Arctic oscillation, a negative NAO phase, and an El Nino. What that just does is it enhances each other's effects. This is very rare. We saw this in, say, 1972, 1952, and maybe 2010 or 2016 for a little bit. But this is a very rare phase. And like I said, 2016, 2010, this kind of did happen, but really the last time we saw it to the extent of this were a very negative Arctic oscillation or very negative NAO phase as well as a strong El Nino. The last time this happened was about around 1972, 1973, which is really just going to enhance those effects you saw in the El Nino. That's going to enhance the effects, enhance snowfall in the southeast and the southwest, enhance severe weather chances, enhance all of that. To a degree we usually don't see. So that could bring a lot of severe weather with all these three factors together to Florida, the Gulf Coast, a lot more. Like, not just El Nino, where you usually have a little bit more. I mean, a lot more. And these effects could also go up the East Coast and even to the Mid-Atlantic and a little bit of the Northeast, to where we could have northeasters, blizzards up there. So I think the Mid-Atlantic Northeast snow chances will be way up. I think that will actually be the hot spot for this year. This would be in a lot of other people say, well, the Mid-Atlantic and Pacific Northwest, they will get much drier air and much warmer air, because all of these three hinder their how much rain they get and how cool it gets. So obviously all these three working together are going to make those areas a lot less eventful this winter. So here's the forecast. NAO. Well, again, NAO and Arctic oscillation, you can see Arctic oscillation on the right, NAO on the left. We can see that these are very short-term things. But what most forecasts see, the 7-day, the 10-day, the 14-day forecast, we can see this stays in a negative phase for the most part. And even if it were to go in a positive phase, I would expect it to go right back to negative for the NAO. So we're staying in negative, and a pretty strong negative too, around -1 right now. And for the AO, we're actually, while the forecasts are a little iffy, it goes positive to positive very quickly. You can see it's very short term, but it goes right back to negative and down to -1 again. So the average of forecast has to staying towards negative in a lot of these ensembles, and any ensemble that shows it going to positive goes right back to negative in time for the winter to add wetter air, cooler air to the East Coast and the Southeast and the Southwest. So like I was saying, all of these factors are going to be helping each other. Now again, this is very uncertain and things could change as the AO and NAO are very short term, but what we're going to be seeing is these working together, wetter, cooler air, Southeast, Southwest, maybe even it's the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, drier, like I keep reiterating this, drier air, hotter air, warmer air, sorry, Mid-Atlantic, Pacific Northwest, uneventful, they'll still get stuff, but it's going to be much more uneventful for them. So let's go into analogs. One of the analogs for blizzards, total snowfall. January 22nd to 23rd, 2016, we are seeing an example of a similar setup. Not as strong, but still a similar setup. We do see a massive blizzard that affected the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, one of the hot spots I'm expecting. We see up to 30 inches, over 36 inches into parts of Pennsylvania, into Virginia, and even into New Jersey, where we can see up to 30 inches, into parts of Virginia, over 1 to 2 feet. So obviously we are going to be seeing a lot of more snow, and a lot of that snow into the southeast as well. So obviously some Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast have to watch out this winter due to all of these effects working together, as well as this. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but this happened in a very similar setup. This is when the NAO and the AO were very negative and the El Nino was very strong. This is the most similar analog, and something that happened during 1973 was a massive southern snowstorm. We see measurable snowfall down into the Florida Panhandle and Big Bend, and then trace snowfall still into the Florida Peninsula, and then in central Georgia up to 20 inches of snow, into South Carolina up to 25. Those coastal areas are seeing a lot of snow. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, obviously, in any setup, no matter how strong it is. This is a very rare setup, so the chances of this happening are very unlikely still. But knowing that in a setup similar to this, a very rare setup, that this happened, it is something really to watch out for. And then the seasonal precipitation outlook, above average precipity into the Gulf Coast, Florida especially. Florida is going to get the most rain, or most above average rainfall at least, into the mid-Atlantic up the East Coast into the Northeast. Now, like I said, obviously a lot of precipitation, a lot of cold air on the Gulf Coast, Florida, stuff like that. So that's going to really enhance that severe weather activity. Florida, the Gulf Coast, into Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, those states that always get these huge tornado outbreaks in this spring. During the winter, we are expecting, y'all, this is usual, you guys also get a lot of severe weather during the spring, as not the spring, the well, you do in the spring, but I'm talking about winter. You guys get a lot of severe weather as well. Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia in the winter months, as well as the Gulf Coast and Florida. And due to the amount of moisture going into those regions, those areas that naturally get severe weather, no matter the setup, in winter and spring, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, always get a lot of severe weather, no matter the setup. Like I said, with this extra moisture fueling you, and I can't repeat this enough, with this extra moisture fueling you, you're also going to be a severe weather hotspot. And then all this other moisture into the Gulf Coast and Florida, Florida Panhandle, Florida Big Bend, Florida Peninsula, you guys are also going to be a severe weather hotspot. So those three states I just mentioned, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and even along the Gulf Coast, Florida, the Florida Peninsula, you guys are going to be a severe weather hotspot this year, this winter, especially when you get more inland towards the inner Panhandle, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, especially central Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi, because that's going to have a constant access to moisture, and y'all just always get these big severe weather events. Even into Louisiana, we are expecting a lot of severe weather. So obviously, that I would say from New Orleans to say Gainesville, and then you take that north up into northern Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. That region is going to be a severe weather hotspot. And then due to the significance of this El Nino and the AO and NAO bringing all this moisture, we could also see some severe weather events more north than that. But yeah, just a lot of severe weather in those regions. While those more northern regions I mentioned of central, northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, and northern Georgia aren't getting a lot of extra moisture. They're not as much as like more south of them. They're always getting severe weather. You guys know, 2021 huge tornado outbreak, high risk in the spring, and in winter they also get a lot of severe weather. So I cannot reiterate this enough. That region, yeah. And then we go to the southwest, where that moisture is going to cause flooding, and and obviously you guys are very susceptible to landslides and stuff like that in some regions, so that's going to be a lot. And just across this whole southern region is going to be a lot of flooding. And then you get up into the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, where this extra moisture is going to fuel snowstorms, and an active storm track is going to bring you guys northeasters. So obviously those areas also have to watch out a lot. And I'm reiterating this because this is a very rare setup. And then obviously these forecasts I showed you, the last one, this is the temperature forecast, more southern cold temperatures, and then that warmer temperatures are displaced to the west and north. And then precipitation, tons of extra precipitation in the southeast and to the up the east coast, and even the Pacific Northwest. If I were to update this, I would add not the Pacific Northwest. I would add the Southwest into above average, and I would extend those below average precipitation into the Pacific Northwest to update it. Because obviously, with the negative NAO and AO, these effects of the El Nino are going to be very strengthened, and then tons of above average snow for the Mid Atlantic, Northeast into Texas, the south central United States, and then I would extend that below average snowfall into the Pacific Northwest as well. So the Pacific Northwest and Midwest getting obviously below average snowfall chances. So yeah, anyway, guys, that's gonna be it for the video. I hope you enjoyed, and that's gonna be it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. So anyway, bye guys. Have a good